Israel is intensifying its invasion of Lebanon. Having already taken several Hezbollah positions, they're now committing more forces to the fight. Meanwhile, they also are in a standoff with UN forces in certain sections. Let's talk about all of this and where Israel's invasion of Lebanon might be headed here in the future. First, Israel's continued to seize multiple key positions along the border, where they've published images of what they've captured so far. This first position we're going to look at now was taken by the Golani Brigade working in an olive grove in South Lebanon. There they discovered multiple concealed and prepared fighting positions, including a tunnel and a fixed mortar position. Notice that even the mortar position is under the tree canopy. This really helps them to conceal themselves from surveillance drones. Unless a drone happens to catch the smoke from the trees or see the thermal images of the bodies through the canopy, then it's going to be very difficult for them to find this kind of a position. Still though, they managed to locate and seize it. Once there, they also discovered a tunnel, as well as a weapons cache that included small arms and anti-tank missiles. The IDF says that this position was used to ambush IDF soldiers and target towns in northern Israel. Next, here's some drone footage from Kar Yaron, where the IDF says they've dismantled several Hezbollah fighting positions. Here you can see a section of town that's pretty heavily destroyed. You can also see down the corner what looks to be a staging ground for IDF vehicles. Looks like here we've got some Humvees and APCs. Not quite sure what sort of staging area this is or if this is a temporary patrol base. The way that they're all parked tells me that they're not particularly worried about security. Normally if they were worried about security, then they'd be a bit more spaced out and maybe outward facing, but here they just appear to be staging for something. The demolition that we're seeing in this section of town as well also makes me think of some of the demolition that we've seen out of Gaza, though it's not clear what the plan is here. Some of the demo in Gaza is to clear a new path for heavy equipment like tanks and APCs for a longer term route that they will want to maintain. However, that being said, this is in Lebanon, so I'm not quite sure if that's really in the cards here. Here in this next video, you have IDF troops entering into another Hezbollah tunnel, which is storing more weapons. Again, small arms and anti-tank munitions. It's got some larger weaponry here too, mines, heavy machine guns. With all of that, the IDF is continuing to spool up its invasion. They just announced that the 146th Hempetz Division has begun operations inside of Lebanon. This is the first reserve division to be committed to the fight and the fourth overall division to be sent into Lebanon. Prior to the invasion, Israel ran another call-up of reservists, something that they did prior to the invasion of Gaza. However, as that fight commenced, they began to deactivate some of the reserve forces and send them home. Now that they're committing more forces to Lebanon, I'd imagine that we'll see some more divisions committed to the fight in Lebanon, as well as a lot of reservists committed to this fight as well. However, all really depends on the scope of this invasion, which we'll talk about here in a little bit in this video, as well as the length of time that they plan on staying in Lebanon. If it's a limited ground invasion and they really only plan on staying south of the Litani River, then they may not need nearly as many divisions as they might need if they were to, say, push north of the Litani River and push towards Beirut. But again, we're going to talk about this here in just a moment because it appears that this might have changed. While operating in Lebanon, the IDF came in contact with UN forces that are still holding their positions. In one of my last videos, I said that both the UN and the Lebanese military had withdrawn to north of the Litani River to deconflict with the IDF. Apparently, this report is false. It appears that clearly the UN is still there, and I've seen some other reporting that the Lebanese military is still there. So a little bit of mixed reporting that we're seeing here. Fog of war, I get that, but I just want to make that correction here. I also left a little note on whichever video that was. Here at Camp UN 652, 30 Irish peacekeepers are in a standoff with the IDF, where the IDF is demanding their evacuation from several Lebanese villages that they're currently assigned to. Officially, both UNIFIL and the Irish government have rejected these calls for the Irish military to withdraw from this position. As you can see from these photos taken by one of the Irish peacekeepers, the IDF is operating very close to the UN base and even has a Merkava tank pointing its main cannon towards the base on a couple of occasions. This is something that I think is to be expected whenever you've got multiple different militaries from multiple different governments that don't necessarily see eye to eye operating in the same small geographic area. This is why deconfliction is super hard, and it's also why deconfliction is super important. Now you have a situation where the IDF is facing off against UN peacekeepers. Luckily, so far it appears non-violent, but there's a standoff nonetheless. It's going to delay and distract from IDF operations, and it's going to delay and distract from UN operations in the area as well. Mind you, the UN is there in an anti-terror capacity. No, they've not really done a good job because Hezbollah has been operating in that area, and that's why the IDF are invading, but still, it's a conflict that you don't really want to have, that you can avoid if you just have people talking to each other. And to me, it really reflects poorly on both the Israeli government on their upper levels and the UN and the Irish government, that they're just not talking to each other. Anytime you have forces failing to deconflict, it's really a reflection of people just failing to communicate with one another and make sure that, they're not putting their own people in harm's way. And this is an indicator that that's exactly what's going on right now. The Irish aren't the only ones operating in southern Lebanon. In fact, there are about 11 different countries operating within the UN contingent there. If the UN is choosing to keep their peacekeepers in this area, then the IDF is going to have to deconflict with them. I don't necessarily know if the IDF has to directly deconflict with each parent country that sent their forces to this area, or if there's a unified UN command that the IDF needs to get in touch with. But in either case, there needs to be clearly more communication to make sure that there aren't standoffs like this happening where you have the IDF trying to take over a UN base or a UN patrol base, and the UN troops there being like, you're not taking this base, we're still here. With all of this going on, Hezbollah launched one of their largest rocket attacks on northern Israel. Over 100 rockets were fired, however most appear to have been intercepted by the Iron Dome system. There were still some impacts around Haifa. Haifa has been the target of so many rocket attacks since the start of this conflict. It's situated in the north of Israel. It's a pretty large population center for the area, and so of course it's become a big target for Hezbollah. Hezbollah is able to target Haifa not only with their rocket systems, they can also target it with other kinds of systems as well. So of course it's easy pickings for them. Of course, Hezbollah's overall goal here is to overwhelm the Iron Dome system by just launching more rockets than the system itself can handle and intercept. And here we see a case where that might have happened, where we've got some rocket impacts in some residential areas. That's of course pretty typical of a rocket attack like this, where you're firing in bulk dozens or well over 100 unguided, crude, cheap rockets into a populated area. This attack followed a speech by Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General Naim Qassem. Qassem stated that Hezbollah doesn't have any vacant positions, so if you were looking to apply, I hate to break the bad news to you, but it doesn't look like they're hiring. He also claims that Hezbollah will continue to fight and that Hezbollah will defeat Israel, and we'll just have to see how this shakes out. Interesting though, he says that Hezbollah does not have a new leader and will not proceed with one. And honestly, I kind of doubt this, given that anytime they name a new leader, that leader magically dies from some sort of a JDAM from an Israeli plane. It seems that they really might have more incentive to not name a new leader and just kind of keep that under wraps if they want to have some sort of unified command of their large organization. That being said, maybe they are operating without a leader, but I have some questions if that's what they're planning on doing. I mean, who's going to accept responsibility for commanding the whole organization? Who's going to maintain the strategic vision? You can only run a large organization like this in wartime with no leader for so long before things really start to get complicated. Netanyahu also made a speech where he confirmed that Nasrallah, as well as his successor and his successor's successor, have all been killed in Israeli strikes. Again, not necessarily news, since we knew that these strikes had taken place and that the IDF had announced it previously, but now we have some sort of official confirmation from Netanyahu. Right now, at a strategic level, Israel is invading southern Lebanon, but they've also had to really balance this fight with several others. In another recent speech, Netanyahu stated that Israel is fighting a war on 7 fronts. This sounds like a lot, but when you break it down, this is a fight in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. Obviously, not all of these fronts will see IDF troops operating on the ground, but some of these fronts are being fought in the air and with, aircraft and missiles. So, the IDF is having to account for them. Of course, the ground theaters would be West Bank, Gaza, and Lebanon, and the air theaters would be Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Iran. Now, Syria is in the air right now, but of course, Syria borders Israel with the Golan Heights. That's always been an area of tension. The Houthis have claimed that they're moving some grouping of forces to the Golan Heights to fight Israel on the ground. So, we'll see if those forces even exist. To me, it just sounds kind of like a made-up claim, but we'll just have to wait and see, because that could be another area where this turns into a ground operation. But as you can imagine, that's really a lot for the military to have to balance all at one time. Medium to long term, it's an open question how long Israel can sustain this fight. I think it's also a fair question to ask how long Iran can sustain this fight. They're having to maintain their axis of resistance and fight Israel, again, also themselves on 7 fronts. They've built their axis to have this kind of a fight, But that being said, it really, now the cards are being put on the table. So we'll have to see how long the Axis can really operate in reality and how long Iran themselves can operate in a direct conflict. Of course, it suits Iran and really the Axis of resistance to keep this conflict in a bit of a lower grade than where they're at right now. That is where Iran and Israel are not directly trading blows against each other, and Israel's having to face off the Axis of resistance themselves, and Iran's able to just kind of stay out of the fight, puppeteer it, supply the Axis members and proxies, throughout the fight, but they're able to preserve their own force and their own country and regime stability in the process. While all the eyes were on Gaza at the start of the war, now all eyes are on southern Lebanon. And in that recent speech where Netanyahu basically confirmed that the leaders of Hezbollah have been destroyed, he also stated that the goals for the operation in Lebanon may have changed. Previously, he had stated that the goal for the invasion of Lebanon would be limited, being that the operation will stay south of the Litani River. However, Netanyahu said in his recent speech that Israel might be seeking to dismantle Hezbollah similar to how they've dismantled Hamas. And if that's the goal, then they may have to push north of the Litani River into places like Beirut and other parts even further north in Lebanon. Now, this would be very challenging. It would be very costly. It's going to take a long time. I mean, if you've thought the war in Gaza has taken a while, just wait, because this is going to be way worse because Hezbollah is way bigger. Lebanon's a much bigger area. Lebanon is a sovereign country, so legally there's a lot of different, changes to how Israel has to approach this. And again, Hezbollah is a crown jewel of Iran's axis of resistance. So that changes Iran's calculus to where, okay, now they're not necessarily able to supply Hezbollah in the sense, in so much as Hezbollah is able to keep Israel in kind of like that South Litani kill zone, fight a somewhat limited war. Now Hezbollah is in a fight for survival. And if it gets to the point where Hezbollah looks like it's about to capitulate, does Iran get involved directly? I'm not quite sure how Israel proceeds long-term without dismantling Hezbollah. I mean, they are, enemies for decades now. And at some point, somebody's going to have to take out the other. But, that being said, looking at the conflict right now, this is going to be very costly and it's going to be very time intensive. And really, all that said, we're still waiting on Israel to strike back at Iran for the ballistic missile attack. So there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of pieces on the board. So we'll have to continue to monitor this. So subscribe to this channel if you found this video helpful or informative. Comment your thoughts on all of this down below. We've talked about a lot. So if you have any thoughts, definitely share them. Let's keep the conversation going. And with all that, of course, subscribe for the next video and more videos just like this. With all that, I'll see you all next time. Later.